Welcome to Lighten Up, the art of living clutter-free, a podcast where we tackle the literal and figurative clutter standing between you and your healthiest and happiest life. I'm Melanie, your host, coach, and guide on this journey to help you design a life that you love. Whether it's clearing out your kitchen cabinets, untangling your digital files, or letting go of the mental blocks that hold you back, we're here to make space for what truly matters. Let's lighten up together, starting now. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Lighten Up, the art of living clutter-free. I'm Melanie, your host, and I am here to talk with you about all things clutter. And I have a special guest with me today, and I think people are going to wonder, what does that have to do with clutter? But if you know me, I can make everything about clutter. So first of all, I want to welcome Jhanell. She is the founder of Moro, an aging wellness company dedicated to redefining retirement as a vibrant and fulfilling phase of life. Inspired by her own experiences caring for her dad with dementia and retirement-bound mom, and observing the challenges faced by her peers, Jhanell recognized that people carefully plan how they will spend their money during retirement, but often give far less thought to how to spend their time. Moro is committed to guiding people to design a more active and holistic vision of life after work. Welcome, Jhanell.
Hello, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
I am so excited you're here also because I think everything I just said, yes, 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 and I think there are probably people out there who are going to say, why do I need her help? I know what I want to do. I want to relax. But then relax how? And then I think the other piece of it is that for many people, especially people who have been very career driven, and have often, labeled themselves, or their identity was associated with what they did, whether they were an attorney or a financial expert or a professor or a therapist or whatever it is. So utilizing identity differently is going to be important. So but let's just dive into it. First of all, why are you here? Why are you doing this?
That's like the $1,000,000 question. I call sometimes myself an accidental entrepreneur. My background is in advertising. I spent over 15 years doing brand strategy, and then I stumbled across some research and statistics about aging, longevity, and one of the stats is saying that by 2030, one of the most in-demand jobs would be home health aides. And it kind of piqued my interest and curiosity. And as a strategist, it's important for me to kind of dig when I see something interesting. And I questioned why, and the why led me to the fact that people are looking to age in place. We're living longer. Technology and science has improved medicine. So, people are wanting to not go into a nursing home. They want to age and ultimately die at home. And so the need of home health was like, okay, that's interesting. And so the aging and wellness space became so kind of exciting as I thought about, well, what am I going to do when I retire? But also, how am I going to help my parents? And I saw that a lot of my peers, their parents were struggling somewhat as they retired. And I know you brought up the point of like, well, why I can do this on my own. And it's true. You can certainly do it if you're a very proactive person. But we've seen time and time again when people think that they can do it on their own and they end up, the first year is great. Maybe they have grandkids and they're traveling or they're helping to take care of their grandkids. But, once the grandkids either reach a certain age, they're like, grandma and grandpa, maybe not as necessary anymore. And then what when you've built your kind of retirement around your grandkids? So you really need to create your own space, your own lane when you retire. And that's primarily what we're doing and helping people plan for.
For sure. For sure. Okay. I love that. And I think that's probably very helpful to a lot of people. Came with so many questions because my brain is full of so many things.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I was thinking about, I'm sorry if I didn't warn you I was going to mention this, but I think we hear more and more often not all the time, but more and more often we hear that there are people who have retired and then like a week or two or a month or two, a very short period of time have passed. And in some cases, it's going to be like completely coincidence. It
Right.
happened to a professor of my husband's. He retired, I think it was like a year or two ago. And then a couple weeks later, he was gone. And I'm sure that there are so many other factors involved. Is this something that you've heard? What do you think is behind it?
Yeah, I've heard, I mean, there are medical reasons why, so I can't tie everything that I'm doing to that medical outcome, or I can't say that doing this will prevent that. But
Right, right,
But
right.
what we do know is that when people don't have anything constructive to do with their time, right, their cognition can start to decline. And I've heard anecdotally and in real life with even my parents and loved ones who've retired and either, they're not as active. So their physical health starts to decline. Maybe they're gaining weight or maybe they've lost weight. Maybe they're not using kind of the planning skills and all the things that we used to use, keeping up with a routine, all the things that you're used to when you have a structured way of living when you're working professionally. Think about it. Like you have a routine. Now this routine is gone. And that's part of the problem, right? The routine is somewhat taken away. And I think what excites people about, and that's kind of a double edged sword, right? What excites people about retirement is the freedom. And freedom is freeing until your days are like, okay, but how am I going to fill my time? And I can see that for some people that becomes stressful. It becomes anxiety inducing. Their brains get cluttered. I mean, you talk a lot about cluttering and mental clutter, right? They're trying to figure out what to do and they're not tapping into the resources. So now they've become overwhelmed with, okay, well, how do I get out of this rut? How does, depression may start to form? And so that can exacerbate and show up in chronic illnesses or in other, physical manifest in your physical health, really.
Right. You touched on something, and that was, like being scheduled or regimented or something
Yes.
like that. And I always say I would love to be completely spontaneous, but with an ADD brain, I can't be completely spontaneous. It's spontaneous with a little bit of planning.
Yeah.
So I think what a lot of people think in retirement is, well, we can be totally spontaneous. Our time is our own. And the reality is that some of us need to incorporate some kind of organization in whether it's keeping a calendar or having specific times of the day that you do certain things. I would imagine that this is something you come across.
Yeah, I mean, I call it structured exploration, right? It's really what you kind of have to transition to. So the people that I've worked with last year, we try to create a runway. So if you're retirement bound or retirement eligible, right? The idea is that if you work with a coach or someone like myself, we're helping prepare you to transition out of the workforce. And so the structured kind of exploration is meant to highlight, okay, this is your traditional routine while you work, whatever that was. You're responding to emails, you're in meetings, you're traveling for work, you're doing whatever. Those things are kind of removed. Maybe you had hobbies, but the idea is to kind of start incorporating things and interests that kind of get you excited, and start slowly incorporating that as a way to help you transition and navigate what that life is going to be like when you don't have work demanding your time and structure Monday through Friday, 9 to 5.
Right, right. And I think one of the things that I'm hearing also is like this is going to be different depending on where you live.
Correct.
Like I think as someone who lives in New York City, like I'll tell you at times I'm bored. However, with all the opportunities of museums and shows and dance and music and parks and zoos, like when you add all that up, you could have a pretty busy life that way. But I've also heard a lot about encouraging people retiring in college towns because of how much opportunity there is for theater and music and dance and classes, adult education. Are those the kind of things that you're talking to your clients about?
Yeah. So the way that we structure retirement planning, the non financial kind, we call it lifestyle,
Mhm.
is They're core areas that we want to focus in. Continuous education is one of them. A lot of universities are recognizing that people are living longer. They're wanting to kind of keep sharp. And one way that they can do that is by enrolling in either certification program or some 2-year program, or some people are even going back and getting additional full, master's degrees, right? And
Right.
so continuous education is clearly a good way to kind of help people figure out maybe they were an accountant for years and then decided that they have more of a creative side. And so they want to explore that in retirement. And so that's one way continuous education or lifelong learning is an important part for some people of retirement. It could also mean learning how to play an instrument. Right. It could be learning how to play a guitar or the piano as a way to kind of stimulate your brain, making sure that you're learning something new. It's also an opportunity to build a community of other musicians and people learning how to play music. So it taps into a lot of different things.
You said a couple of things, and one I want to make sure we get back to, and it's that concept of community. You have me thinking is like, how many things as adults do we say, I wish I had? Whether it's like, I wish I had kept up with French, because then I would be able to speak it, maybe not more fluently, but more efficiently. So let's jump back to that concept of community.
Sure. So, and there's so much about community that I think proves to be extremely important. We saw that the importance of community during COVID because people were isolated, and we all found the internet as a way to build community, whether it was through a social platform or some type of, online. People were taking online yoga classes, people were cooking together, people were doing all types of things together. So we recognize how much when our lives were completely kind of turned upside down, we recognize the importance of community. What we also recognize is that older adults who lived alone were impacted gravely because their sense of community changed, right? They were more vulnerable. So a lot of them kind of maintained their kind of space and stayed home more often. So the importance of community for us is paramount. And so the ways that we try to help people build community, you mentioned language too, because I want to tap into that. But
Yes, please.
community could be joining your local older adults club and center, depending on where you live. But most cities and states have a Department of Aging and their resources. And I encourage people to certainly tap into those resources. For other people, it could be a faith based community. So if you go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque, there's an opportunity there to join a club or a group, Bible study, whatever it is within that community. And then there are organizations like Hank and some other organizations geared towards older adults who are helping and recognize that you need to build a sense of community around whatever interest group. And then the last thing is, I think we need to get people thinking about creating their own community. So being more proactive. So if you're interested in playing an instrument or whatever, it's so easy now. I think older adults sometimes don't recognize how easy we have the tools. And, I'm here to help guide them to create their own sense of community online or in person.
Okay, that's great. You said you wanted to touch back on
Oh,
language.
the language. Okay,
Yeah.
so I worked with someone last year and she wanted to learn French, but she was like she thought it was like out of reach. Like I'm not going to go back to school and she just thought it was impossible. But her ultimate goal was to brush up on her French so she could go to Paris and she had never been. So traveling was also a part of what she wanted. I was like, well, that's an interesting goal to kind of tie your interest in learning or relearning, re-engaging in language and also travel. And so I presented her with different places that she could learn. You can do classes online. You can download Babbel or Duolingo and brush up there. Or there are online communities where you can speak to a French speaking person and learn more immersive way of kind of learning the language. And then you have more traditional ways, it's just like going to a local college or community college. And so that was something that she was like, okay, I never really thought that this would be possible in such an easy, accessible way. And I think accessibility is a key thing with trying to work with a population who thinks that things are out of their reach because they're older. And that's not the case.
I love that. Older people don't always get all of the respect that they deserve for the lives that they have lived. And I think and one of the things that I really appreciated hearing about what you said is like most of us have heard of Babbel and Duolingo or have in fact utilized them, but that's also something where it's just you and the device as opposed to being a part of a group. And you made me think about how my younger daughter was studying in St. Petersburg, Russia when the
Wow.
pandemic hit. She'd been there for 2 months, and we forced her to come home,
Yeah.
terrible parents that we are. So one of the things that happened that makes me sad is that there wasn't quite the fluency at the end of the program as it would have been had she been there. She did have a conversation partner that she still met with once or twice a week, I think,
Right.
via Zoom. So they were able to, that's how you really get good at it is by, having conversation. But she was having it via Zoom as opposed to in a cafe, at a museum, walking down the street, sitting in a park where everyone around you is speaking that language. And that's really for me. I know if I were in a classroom, I would benefit more than doing something. But I'm a queen of virtual. I love Zoom, and it does make a difference when like you're live and in person, communicating with people. Talk to me what working with you looks like. Someone reaches out and says, "I want you to be my retirement coach." What does the process look like?
Yeah, the process is fairly straightforward. I think the first and foremost, there's a brief consultation just to make sure there's like a discovery call to make sure that it's a good fit. You understand the services that I provide so that there's just leveling the playing field, right? There's no misunderstanding. So once we do that and you decide to proceed, I do send you a pretty in-depth survey for you to complete. And it basically kind of goes through everything. It's looking at your health, your emotional space, what you did for your career. You start kind of mapping out or thinking about at least some of your goals and aspirations for working with a coach. And then we review it together in the first 90-minute phone call. And then we kind of start structuring things and setting goals. And then what I like to offer is a way for me to get a better understanding of who you are, because I'm looking at the whole you. And I find that sometimes when people talk about themselves, they leave little things out. And so I invite people to share 2 or 3 family members or friends that I can speak to one on one. And I use that as an opportunity to really kind of learn a little bit about what people think about you and how you're perceived. And I bring all of that information back to you and back into the coaching modules. And so an example of what that can look like is someone who might have been, an accountant. And so they found that they are just kind of structured and they're a numbers person. Dad's always been the number person. But what you don't know about dad is that he's really creative and he was the person in the family that planned all the trips or maybe was big into holidays and decorating the home. And so that was his thing. So these are the little pieces of how I can bring out hobbies and interests because that's something that we also talk a lot about, right? How are you going to spend your time is what are you interested in? And I think a lot of older adults sometimes struggle with that because depending on where you were raised and how you were raised, you saw your parents working and that's what they did. They didn't have hobbies, they didn't have interests, they didn't really pursue them in the way that I think my generation, millennials have, or maybe even Gen Zers too, right? Or Gen Xers. So it's making them feel free and open to explore things that they had never done before. And then after that, once we set the goals and the modules, there are 45-minute sessions. We have up to 12 sessions. You can do 6 sessions. Really, it depends on the plan that you're interested in. But at the end of it, really is hopefully you'll walk away with feeling a lot more confident and you'll have the clarity that you need because that's what our business is built on, right? Providing you with confidence and clarity so you feel good about the transition that's happening.
That's great because I think a lot of people don't really have a picture of what coaching in general looks like. And most certainly, more specifically to the kind of coaching you do. So, this is the podcast about clutter. So, we knew that we were going to have to get to some,
Yeah.
conversation about physical and or mental clutter. And really where I wanted to start was, so one of my grandfathers retired before I was really conscious of what that meant.
Right.
And my other grandparents retired at your typical, like, my grandfather sold his business at like 64 or something like that. And then
Huh.
was a house husband for a
Yeah.
couple of years while my grandmother, who was a little bit younger, waited until she was 64. And then they bought their place in Florida and they moved down there. And so I want to say two things about that. And one is my grandparents worked so hard. They saved, they were thrifty, and then they lived their best lives when they retired. They were in a retirement
Good.
community. I remember looking at photographs when we unfortunately went to Florida after they had passed, and there were all these photos from a come as you are party and another one that was like a costume party, although come as you are, ended up with a lot of costumes. I remember thinking, oh my God, my grandparents who did not go to 4-year college programs were kind of living like, to me, that's like, oh, it's a dorm with
Yeah.
no classes, or no, if you didn't want. My grandmother, of course, played mahjong, and my grandfather bowled, and, she took jazzercise classes and water aerobics, and they really lived their very best lives, ones that I really felt like they deserved.
Yes.
And I think whether we went to college or not, that's like kind of what we dream of, like having fun and living, a satisfying life. But I think there are a lot of us now who don't believe that we could retire at 64. That's, finances, or my grandparents actually ended up living longer than they really thought they would. They lived until their late 90s, although I don't know that their 90s were all they would have dreamed of. One of them had dementia, so she really
Yeah.
didn't experience that. But at one point in their 80s, they said, if I had known I was going to live this long, I would have worked longer.
Longer.
And that's not the regret we want to be having later. So I know you're not a financial coach, but how do you navigate that fear of maybe I'm doing this too soon, or something like that?
Oh yeah, outliving. I mean, I had this conversation with my uncle. He's concerned that he's turning 70 this year, and he's concerned. He's semi-retired and he still works mainly because it's something to do, and because he wants to make sure that when he does fully retire, he has enough money. He doesn't want to outlive his retirement, right? So I think that is a common fear that a lot of older adults. So I would, as a part of working with me, I work with financial advisors that I refer people out to if they don't currently have one, to kind of make sure that they are optimized for retirement. For some people, it means taking on an Encore career, which means they're working part time or whatever number of hours to help supplement whatever their retirement savings are. And so they'll have a better picture if they're working with a financial advisor, exactly how much money they will be able to kind of live off of, and potentially how many years that money will last them. There are obviously going to be incidences where people are going to live out their retirement savings, and hopefully family will step up. I certainly had to do that with my dad. My sister and I had to step up and help support him throughout the latter parts of his life. So a lot of children end up being, or grandchildren end up helping out parents and grandparents as they get to the, you know, towards the end of their lives.
Sure, sure. Thank you for sharing that. You said the words encore career, which I don't
Yes.
know that I've ever heard before. And talk about a beautiful way of describing something that might not necessarily be what someone wants, but like how many of us ended up doing something we didn't plan on? And what a great idea that I can part time work in an area
Yeah.
that had felt out of reach or something like that.
That's exactly it. It is an encore because, retirement, the word retirement, I wish there was another word, because I think certainly when when I start talking to some people about retirement, right? Anxiety, it's just an anxiety inducing word, right? Because they're like, what am I going to do after retirement? So encore career for some people feels like, okay, I've ended, maybe I was a nurse, maybe I was a teacher, and how else am I going to kind of fill my time? For some people, it's taking what they did and maybe trying to figure out another way to use those skill sets. So maybe if you were a teacher, maybe you're not in the classroom every day, but you're teaching, you're doing something else. Maybe you're teaching a passion of yours. Maybe it was sewing or whatever, some other type of educational or fun education.
Sure.
So
I love it.
Encore Careers really is an opportunity for people to tap into an interest that they had and they want to explore, or just a way to gain money part time. I had a family friend actually who was in finance for years. She was done with the corporate world and she got a job working at a boutique in the mall. She worked part-time. She loved talking to people and she likes fashion. And for her, it was the perfect way. And there are some limitations about how many hours you can work if you're collecting Social Security. So for a lot of people, they need to check into that before they can tap into a paid. But one other thing I will say that I talked to someone about considering doing is joining a board. If there is a nonprofit organization that you are passionate about, or a space, an area that you are passionate about, joining a board could feel like work. Some boards pay, some don't, but that's also a way to kind of give back and also potentially make some money.
I sat on the board of my temple for many years
Okay.
and was the youngest person on
Yes.
the board
Yeah.
by decades because it's a great role for people, to spend time in post retirement. So I was writing notes while you're talking because like there were
That's
so many
okay.
things. And I wanted to go back to Encore career again. And I love it because like, I hear Encore and I hear celebratory,
It is.
that makes it sound special as opposed to the end. The word retirement, oh my God, I hear retire. I think sleep. Like, is that what's going to happen when I hit that time in my life? I'm going to sleep more. I mean, maybe I will, although sleep is like harder and harder the
And
older I
that's
get.
good.
But it made me remember a time, this was a solid almost 20 years ago. And I was, coaching a weight loss group when I worked for Weight Watchers. And it was a weekday morning workshop, which meant you had two clients at that meeting. One were
Mhm.
stay at home moms, and two were retired people.
Right.
And it was summer vacation or spring break or something like that, and someone had brought their son to the meeting.
Uh-huh.
I wanna say he was somewhere around 7 years old, and he was sitting in between his mother and grandmother who were regulars, and we were talking about exercise. I don't even remember what the actual circuitous route we were on that got to the definition of retirement, and so we asked the boy, we said, "So what does it mean to be retired?" And he says, "You sit on the couch and watch TV all day." To which his grandmother was horrified. She went beet red. Like,
Yeah.
clearly, this isn't the impression that she wanted to give. And I said, "So, what are you going to do when you retire?" And he said, "I'm going to sit on the couch and play video games all day." The dream is, listen, and 20 years ago, who knew that you could have a career playing video games? But
Right.
you can now,
Make a lot of money.
right? And I know like there's a lot of TV I could catch up on if I were retired. For sure, I don't want to be sitting on the couch watching TV all day. Like it's one thing to like binge on a rainy
Yeah,
Saturday,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
it's another thing to like, like it's almost like being chained to the TV. You also addressed like being able to sit down and talk to a financial expert, depending, because we can't all live on Social Security. And while this isn't a political podcast, I don't mind getting political at times. And there are no guarantees on Social Security, which is just horrific, especially to people who for decades have been putting money towards their future Social Security. All right, you know what? Let's just dive into the concept of clutter. Okay, I got a question for you
Let's
because
go.
every episode we land on the concept of physical and mental clutter. So, what is the clutter that you see in potential clients?
Yeah, I think the emotional or mental clutter is filled with anxiety, a little bit feeling of overwhelm, um, about what next. And a lot
Mhm,
of that is tied to when people have spent 20, 30, 40 years in one or two careers, their identities are tied to that. And so the clutter starts with how do I pull apart these two identities? And for them, that's the emotional clutter. And I think some ways that I talk to people about kind of getting through that clutter is journaling. There's an exercise that I do called work mode versus life mode. And work mode is identifying all the things, the interests, personalities, identities that encompassed you as Jhanell the worker or Melanie the corporate X person teacher. And
mhm,
then this is really about dreaming almost a little bit, piquing your curiosity about the life mode. Now, this is kind of all in your hands. And I think a lot of it is control too. The mental clutter is control. Some people feel like they're gaining all this control over their lives and like, oh my God, what to do with it? Or they're losing some of the control that they had because it's tied to their profession. And so that's the clutter that we start to kind of unpack in the work mode, life mode module.
I love that. And I know that we talked about this when we first met and how many people I have encountered who, but if I'm not an attorney anymore, who am I? And I was incredibly successful at insert career here. And if I'm not doing it anymore, it's interesting for me also because so my dad, he's still working. Part of it is he needs to be. I
That's
don't
good.
think he needs to work full time. And every time I mention part time, not ready for it, and so I'm not going to stop him because it's not affect I don't think it's seriously affecting his health. I will
Right.
also I like to talk about my dad because he's like this very quirky weird guy, and people usually get a kick out of it, and so he also knows how his mental health is incredibly important. This is someone who's
Right.
in recovery for over 30 years, but he still every day gets in his car in the morning, drives to the park, puts on his old school roller skates,
You
and
did tell
roller
me
skates
about this.
around the park.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
So for the listeners, if I haven't talked about this yet, and so he does this, I don't know, a mile or two,
I
whatever,
love that.
goes home, works, and when he hits a certain stress level during the day, he lives in South Florida, so as long as it's not raining, he gets back into the car, drives back to the park, puts his skates on, goes around again. And I hear so much in that. One is physical activity is so important for our physical and mental health. The reason that he is in as good a health as he is because he has maintained a certain level of activity. But really, for me, the whole mental thing, like practicing whatever it is that each of us does, whether it's meditation or yoga, there's nothing better for my psyche than a sound bath or
Oh,
meditation.
yes, yes.
Very helpful when it's guided by somebody else. And those are the things that in my head, I'm like, I will have more time for those things. Not the once a month sound bath, but I would be doing them weekly or every other day or whatever. Actually, I think that's too much for a sound bath.
Yeah,
But but to know that what kept you healthy before is going to continue to keep you healthy, but also if we were successful in the work that we did, that we can be successful later. I guess really what I'm talking about is that concept of like empowering beliefs,
uh-huh,
if I was successful before, I can be successful again. And it doesn't have to be related to a specific thing. It's just if I work hard, then something is good. So, what do I want to work hard at next? And hard
right.
may not be the right word. What do I want to invest my time and energy into to remove some of that, mental clutter? Okay. So, one of the things that I like to challenge my guests on is not what is the clutter of the people you serve, but what is your clutter? Whether I warned you or not. And you can talk about mental and or physical clutter, whatever it is. But if I said, "So what's your clutter, Jhanell?" What would you say?
That's such a hard one, but such a good one. I have so many. Okay, so I have a lot of work professional clutter. As an entrepreneur, I'm trying very hard in this space to make a difference. And I often find myself having to really explain to people the purpose. Like I would do this work if I could do it for free. But because it's a business, I have to constantly like remind myself. And being a solo entrepreneur, I didn't realize how challenging, and that's the mental clutter for me, emotional clutter, that I have to wake up every day and choose to do this, even though some days are gut wrenchingly difficult because there isn't a ton of money coming in, there isn't a ton of job security because obviously I don't have a full-time job where I was getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, right? I don't have that. And so that creates a lot of mental clutter for me. And the way that I try to push through it every day is by reminding myself of the vision and the goal and who I'm ultimately helping. And that for me helps to soothe some of the clutter that I've created in my brain. Something that so I volunteer at an older adults center, and something that one of the members said to me, not tied to what I'm doing, but in general about living life, but I think it relates nicely to clutter in your brain or just how to live your life is as I kind of tried to get rid of or manage because I don't think I'll ever get rid of this kind of clutter, right? It's managing it in a way that is doesn't impact me negatively. She told me to choose happiness. So wake up every morning and I choose to do this work. I choose to find ways that it brings me joy and happiness and it can empower someone else. So yeah, that's my mental clutter.
I love that. And same, same, same,
Yeah.
same, same. I get it. I get it. I get it
It's
for
the
sure.
motivating, right? And you've been really helpful when I met you at our first I don't know if I can say this, Orion.
Yeah,
Do you
you can say it.
yeah, and you've been really helpful. When I met you in February at a networking event or Ryan Resource, you highlighted how every day you really have to kind of want to do this work, use my experience as a way to guide me and start building connections in this space. That has helped relieve some of the mental clutter. So thank you for the advice, the tips, and just being around like-minded people really helps reduce some of the clutter. Because it's like you're sharing your clutter with others. It's kind of bad, but good in the same way because it's like when someone else gets what you're going through, it's helpful because you don't feel
Yeah,
alone.
100%. I'm glad that I can help someone, even if I'm not always helping myself.
No, I mean, you've
But
pointed me
I
in the right direction.
That's thank you, thank you. It's kind of like opening the drawer and revealing your underwear, because our mental clutter is often associated with something where there is embarrassment or shame. And I feel like my life really very clearly defines that. One, being overweight, having been over 200 pounds, that's very embarrassing. It's very shaming. Clutter, physical clutter is very embarrassing and very shaming. And when my father was, going through the early stages of recovery, that was really like embarrassing and shaming. And I think a lot of that was because I was a very young adult and for some reason connected myself, like somehow because my dad is an addict, that makes me a bad person. I know much better now. I know much, much better now. But when I think about how many things we keep to ourselves because it's embarrassing or shaming, we are losing out or missing out on maybe finding the right person to help us when we're willing to communicate.
I agree with that. One of the things that I've learned in the last 2 years from a professional and personal level. So I mentioned earlier that my dad had dementia, and for a long time, it was hard to share and discuss because I don't know, for all the reasons, right? It's just a hard thing to talk
Yeah.
about. But I found that the more I spoke about it, the more I heard other people sharing, or people would give advice, share their stories about being a caregiver. And the difficult part that I had, because I had a lot of guilt associated with being a caregiver, because I was far away. My dad lived in another country. And so I wasn't there every day. I couldn't provide the resources and the help when I wanted to. And so I think what I've found is how important it is to let go of some of that because that does clutter you, right? The emotional baggage and clutter. Really, I mean, you talking about your dad and dealing with a parent with addiction, I can imagine it's a very similar feeling like I don't want to talk about it, but the more you do, kind of get it off your chest and you realize we're all going through something.
Yes, we are. And we can't, as much as we wouldn't judge others, we shouldn't be judging ourselves. Or maybe we do judge others, but I mean, that's another story for another episode.
Right.
This is great. This is great. So, any last thoughts? What's something that you would like to leave everybody with?
One of the things that I'm excited about or look forward to with growing this business and being in this space is that it's an opportunity to really help people simplify their lives and improve their lives. Everything that we're doing, that I'm doing, it's really self-led. Like we're not telling people how to improve their lives. We're just here to help guide people, help hold them accountable through the process. And it's exciting to me when I feel like someone has left the coaching circle, coaching modules, and they feel like they are ready and capable to succeed in their retirement. Now, again, people can certainly map this out on their own, and I strongly encourage people to do that, right? But if you are the child of a parent who's struggling, or if you are someone yourself who is struggling with trying to figure out what to do next, there is help. Reach out for resources at your local community center, at your local church or synagogue or mosque. Just don't do it alone. That's my biggest takeaway. Just don't do it alone.
I love that. I love that. I forgot to mention, you said that you have a special offering for listeners today. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, if you are interested in working with me or even setting up a consultation, I'm offering for those who sign up for a course, the Essential Plan. If you go to my website, trymoro.com, I'm offering 20% off. So I'm really interested in working with people. It's a great offer. And even if you just want to have an intro conversation, that's also very much doable as well.
I love that. That's very generous of you. And I want to encourage people to take her up on her offer, but maybe not just for you. Maybe there is a mom, an aunt, an uncle, a godparent, someone else that is a generation or a half a generation ahead of you, or maybe the same generation that really needs to be having this conversation. Don't hesitate sharing Jhanell's information. Share this episode. There is someone
Yes.
out there that you love that needs to hear what we have been talking about today. Jhanell, I really appreciate you being here and sharing what really I like to say that, the concept of health and wellness and clutter is something very innovative. And what you're doing is so very, if you look up in the phone book, retirement coaches, I promise you, like 90% of them are financial. A
Yes.
very small portion of them are doing what Jhanell is doing. So please check her out.
Yes.
Jhanell, thank you
Thank
again. This
you
was
for the
wonderful.
opportunity. Thank you for the
Thank
platform. I'm so appreciative, and I really hope we can do this again soon.
Of course. Oh, for sure. You'll be back when I do a greatest hits episode or something that's going to happen. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Lighten Up, the Art of Living Clutter-Free. I hope you found a spark of inspiration to help declutter not just your space, but your mind and life as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could use a little lightness in their life. Remember, it's not about being perfect, it's about progress. Small steps lead to big changes, and I'm here to help you every step of the way. For more tips, resources, and ways to connect, check out my website, follow me on social media, and don't forget to check out the Design Your Healthy Life Strategy program to take your transformation even further. Until next time, keep letting go of what no longer serves you and making room for what truly lights you up.